the reason why we're seeing this level of violence against Black people in urban areas, but also people beyond the viral videos that we're looking at, is that we've retreated from social benevolence. We've dismantled the welfare state, and we've decided to pursue a type of social warfare against the poor instead. And so you have police who are punishing folks, surveilling people, harassing people for survival crimes and criminalized forms of work on a regular basis. And I think that's the problem, right? That's the problem, and it's one that isn't just it isn't just limited to cities, right? And if we really want to
But
build,
wouldn't Isabel Wilkerson and Michelle Alexander say that they're in agreement with that? I mean, I'm
well,
really trying to get at.
actually no. So when Michelle Alexander was confronted by a white woman at one of her talks, this was years ago. I quote this in another article that I wrote. A white woman asked her, she said, you know what, my has been in prison in Texas for a long time. And where does he fit in? You know, he was a victim of the war on drugs,
Mm-hmm.
but this new Jim Crow thing doesn't fit in that case. And I think Michelle Alexander's exact response was, well, he was collateral damage, right? That the
Mm-hmm.
real victims were Black people. So it's almost the same thing as like, you know, Blacks and then the allies, right? It's kind of like whites who are in the same predicament are then thought of as somehow junior partners in this broader set of problems. I think that when you change the categories, you not only change our way of understanding the problem, but also where the alignments are, where the potential coalitions are in the society. And I think it also, this is another important part of it that we haven't really touched on. You know, for a lot of whites, going out for the George Floyd protests and registering their discontent with that incident, that's an easy win, right? That's an easy thing to do. It's much more difficult to think about the ways in which they are culpable, right? So it's one thing to say Derek Chauvin, he's a low-down bastard, he deserves what he gets, right? Or any other racist cop, right? You can kind of point at them and there's always this third person narrative at work. The problem is over there, right? When we talk about this problem in terms of how it's connected to real estate markets in cities, gentrifying zones in cities, right? Clearing out the poor and unhoused folks in cities, making sure that, you know, working class teenagers like in Chicago don't disrupt the Mag Mile and Millennium Park and these other spaces that are coveted as tourist zones. When you think about it like that, this problem of policing makes a certain kind of life available to many people in the country, right? A kind of urban life. And I don't think people are thinking about that connection actively, you know, on a regular basis. Some activists, yeah.
Well,
But
that's
in
funny
terms
because
of like ordinary folks.
the reason I asked you about the debate that's happening on the left right now about policing is exactly because of that. I think people are thinking about it, and that's what's caused the rift. There is a portion of the left that argues that it's bourgeois.
I wasn't talking about the left. I meant like the popular.
No, I know,
You
but
know, most people.
the whole country's talking about how San Francisco is Dante's seventh circle of hell,
Right, right.
and you can't step foot in New York
You can't
without
ride
getting
the
pushed on the
subway.
subway
Right,
track,
right,
and
right, right.
and
True.
there's a bunch of hand wringing. I mean, I don't mean hand wringing. I mean, some people are actually been hurt and killed and abused in the subway, but like there's a big focus on. But what if no one's caring about the old Asian ladies that get put on the train? And the left is leftists are arguing that some portions of the left are being so namby-pamby and hyper idealistic that they're abandoning the working. Yeah, they're abandoning the working classes who are actually strap hangers and who are the ones that are victimized by all of this. And that's hardly really leftism. Right. And then the other part of the left is like, no, I want there to be no crime, but I don't think that agreeing with Eric Adams that I want to put a cop on every car who are being paid overtime and getting $150,000 a year per cop is the same is as good as just giving $150,000 a year to Jordan Neely so he can go somewhere and live. You know what I mean? So I just, to me, that's what's at the core of this debate. And what do you make of all of that?
I mean, I think if that's the way you're characterizing it, right? That these the concerns about urban safety and what it's revealing, right? It's revealing where people actually stand. So as you said about the Young Turks position, then yeah, I mean, I think it makes what I'm saying, important. And again, I don't think I'm the only person who's arguing about surplus population, right? I'm actually channeling other people who made these arguments before about, the post-industrial policing thesis, and there's other arguments along the same lines. But I do think it sets up a different politics, right? Than if we think it's primarily driven by racism. And then, of course, we've got these moments where, it's not racist white cops who are doing the dirty work, right? There's some of us, right? There's sort of Black officers in the case of Memphis, right? And when we look at that, it's not confusing to me when I see that. I'm like, oh,
no,
they're charged with doing the exact same thing, right? They're charged with harassing people who are perceived to be disruptors of, again, this kind of like middle class, historically mostly white, civilization, if you call it that, right? So I think it just sets up a different way of seeing the problem, and also thinking about our culpability. That when I'm enjoying, like last night, I went to a place here in Seattle, and I'm having, just weird cocktails, like a cocktail served in a fucking Mario Brothers cartridge, right? Like that kind of shit. And I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, there's homeless people like a few blocks from here, right? And their presence is not really wanted in this space, right? They are not consumers. They're not people who are seen as full participants. And so in all cities, right, we see these same dynamics at play. And it does matter that Black people are overrepresented in these conflicts, but in a way it also doesn't matter, right? You can go to places that are very white and you see the same dynamics at play. And so that's what I hope to illuminate with the shift in talking about class, which is not a full-on abandonment of thinking about race, but I think situating it in a different way.
Yeah, I guess my read on it is, for one, I think it is possible to acknowledge. I think there is a kind of liberal virtue signaling that exists in some cohorts that doesn't want to acknowledge discomfort of feeling a threat of violence, feeling a threat of theft or whatever, or just the visceral discomfort of seeing somebody struggling, who's defecated themselves, whose clothes are torn, whose foot is amputated, who's obviously not getting health care, all those other kinds of things.
Yeah, someone who's strung out.
Exactly.
Tripping. Yeah.
And that there is sometimes such a desire not to seem like you are indifferent to the human struggling aspect of it. You don't want to seem like you're concerned with the optics of it as opposed to the human suffering of it. So there can sometimes be a superficial like, well, why are you complaining about homeless people? You must just not like homeless people. People are guarding against being read that way. However, I do think, I think the actual leftists who are in a battle with these other people on the left are deeply do not want there to be violence on the subway, are deeply concerned about the older Asian lady that was pushed onto the tracks, are also afraid on the subway from time to time.
Yeah.
But their argument is that the solutions that are being presented by the David Sacks of the world who want to just blast everybody out of San Francisco or whatever, are not humane, and they're not actually well tailored to solving the problem. And what I find very valuable about your approach in the book is that it forces a confrontation over why these people are there, like why this class of people exists, that elides the possibility, that destroys the possibility that you can simply throw cops at this problem until it goes away. Would you understand it as a structural requirement of the economic system that we have chosen, or which has been foisted upon us? It becomes obvious that you can't cop your way out of it. And you might be able to make the cops a barrier for every interaction and like quite literally keep the homeless person from touching you on the train because there's a literal cop there to restrain them or shoot them in the head or whatever people are advocating for. Strangle them to death, whatever. But it doesn't actually get to the problem. So you have to ask yourself, do we want the world where our public funding is for each of us to have like 3 cops walking around arm in arm encircling us like this? Right. And that's how we do society.
Yeah.
Which seems, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the thing about policing, right? It's been a cheap solution, right? Mass incarceration has been a cheaper solution. Than
has
dealing
it been?
With these. I mean, depending on which metric, but when you look at the numbers, people quote the numbers that would be necessary to address the unhoused, right? These can be big figures.
Bigger than it doesn't. It costs as much to incarcerate someone as to send them to college for a year.
Right. There's that old stat. That's true, but I just think like not just the
police salaries, overtime salaries. Half of the LA budget is LAPD.
Yeah, I'm not justifying. I'm saying that I think historically people jumped on the police bandwagon quicker, not thinking that, and in many cases not wanting to share other resources they had, right?
That's it. That's what it feels like. It's a refusal to actually have an inclusive society that would accommodate all of these people.
Right. Throw the cops at these other people. Right.
Yes. It's instead, what seems to be happening is that you get more pay for cops. And earlier, by the way, you said there's some people who would like more, who saw 1/6 and said, okay, fine, more cops are good. There are those people. Most of those people were in Congress. It was AOC and all of them who voted for more police funding. Me, if you ask me, I wouldn't have given them a dime of additional funding. They didn't do a damn thing. Half of those cops let the protesters in the first place, so they didn't need more funding. They needed to, scrub off those Proud Boy tattoos they had underneath their outfits. And moreover, I'm never going to be in a situation. I don't think the bulk of the protesters who were misled by the former president of the United States of America into thinking that actual election fraud had been happening, who are feeling politically disaffected and frustrated, running into what is ultimately a public building, is a problem. That's not the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is why people are so disaffected, why you have the president of the United States encouraging a quote unquote insurrection. Yeah. All of that to me, but I have a hard time being mad at a bunch of people who came to a political protest and had open gates and then walked into the Capitol and walked around and took pictures at Nancy Pelosi's desk. I mean, to be honest,
souvenirs.
I was recording an episode when it happened live that day, and we were talking about it with Thomas Frank, and we were low key like, I wish leftists had it in them. Like, not the I want to impede the election results of it all, but the kind of civil obedience energy, the audacity of it. Yes,
right. Now, for real. But back to the earlier point about the cost of things, right? Yeah. Like, I just think that there are people in most cities who are feeling this, right? A lot of us are feeling it. I mean, I live in Chicago, most years. This year I'm in LA. Right now, this weekend I'm in Seattle. And when you talk to everybody, we're talking about the same things, right? We're like, the quality of life in terms of subway ridership is going down, right? Or public transit. The cost of living is too freaking high, right? So we're talking about a lot of the same things, but I think the issue of bringing out class and talking about how this particular kind of policing regime we have at this historical moment is connected back to the management of inequality, right? When we do that, I think it forces a conversation about people needing to pay up, right? And I think that's a harder thing for folks to get on board with, right? They're okay with the system as it stands. And for a moment, like you said, there was a moment, during the George Floyd crisis, we thought we would see something different, but
and we did. I know it was temporary. But there was a moment in time where a majority of Americans said it was a good thing for protesters to have burned down a police station. I know everybody wants to memory hole this, but we were winning. Like, we were winning the rhetorical battle. I remember this so vividly because my ass was unemployed. The Burn It campaign was done, and I was doing nothing other than looking at the internet all day, watching the news, and following how this was going down and what Joe Biden, expletive deleted ass, was going to say about any of it. And immediately there was the DNC. I remember this so clearly. He started getting on TV and very clearly, without hesitation, no stuttering here, saying, we need more cops. I do not support violence in the streets. And if you turn on MSNBC and CNN, every one of those newscasters, including a whole phalanx of Black opinion makers, bourgeois Black opinion makers, got on there and said, well, if we keep talking about defund, it's going to mean Trump wins.
Yeah.
And if we keep talking about Black Lives Matter, it's going to mean Trump wins.
Right.
And is America really ready for this? Actually, yeah. After like 2 weeks of being like, oh, BLM blah with his chest, Don Lemon was immediately pivoted on his heel and said, oh, actually, Black people need to just be quiet because Trump's going to win in the alternative. So that, like, you cannot undercount the effect that had on public opinion. During that same period of time, by the way, and in a completely different context, Joe Biden talking about being pro-fracking swung the public opinion on fracking 20 points.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So this stuff doesn't exist in a vacuum. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, but you were saying about 2020 that it wasn't lasting, those effects.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't lasting, but it did momentarily kind of pique prick the conscience, right, of a lot of people. But I just think, again, I'm not sure about this election of, Brandon Johnson was totally excited when he's elected, right? Don't get me wrong. But once he's in office, it's like, how does he manage? Like, one of the first things that happens, like right before his inauguration, you've got the seasonal problem in Chicago of a lot of working class Black teenagers who come downtown like everybody else. Some of them behave badly, but of course, because of racism, it gets generalized to all of them, right? That they're all bad behaving folks, right? And there's an outcry from people to do something. And the do something is not, at least in the main, let's do something progressive, right? The reason why these folks are down is because they don't really have anything. The neighborhoods are like bombed out and abandoned commercially. And so they want to enjoy the spring weather like everyone else. They want to walk on Navy Pier. They want to spend time with their friends. Some of them do engage in smash and grab robbery. So I'm not going to completely sugarcoat it. But yeah, this is a problem that he's going to have to address, right? It's not one that Rahm Emanuel addressed effectively other than through more policing. It's not one that and curfews and all sorts of other things. It's not one that Lori Lightfoot was able to handle. But what is this, mayor, young Black mayor with socialist roots going to do in this moment where he has a chance, right? He has a chance to actually change the way that we approach this. But you don't seem too confident.
No, because my understanding, like I
gotta live this. I'm trying to stay confident.
Well, what can you do? I mean, you write in your book, you talk about how there's this wave of Black mayors that comes after the civil rights movement when they, allow us to be mayors,
right?
And how you say you don't want to call them sellouts because many of them came directly from the civil rights tradition, like came straight out of the civil rights movement, and some of them
meant well, some of them.
Okay, so but then what do you call? I have in my notes. So then what do you call them? To what do you attribute their failures? Because and also this is another part of the question is, to what do you attribute Brandon Johnson's success in Chicago when you see such mixed results? You see oftentimes, like what just happened in Philly, the Black candidate that no one really expected to win wins over the progressive candidate, Helen Gim, and everyone's shocked. But oftentimes, especially when there's a divided field like this, and then a predominantly Black city, the identity politics of it all can carry the day in a way that, do you think the vote for Brandon Johnson was really about his progressive politics? Was it about him being the Black candidate? I mean, like, to what does he even have the mandate to do the progressive thing in Chicago? Or was it just a fluke in the way that the Philly outcome seemed to just be ultimately come down to local politics and identity and things like that? Now, I don't mean to be overly dismissive of or overly productive about what happened in Philly, but
I have my cynical moments too. I think Brandon's election wasn't really so much about his identity, right? Because there were other Black candidates in the field who I actually thought had a better chance in the early goings, right? I was looking at some of these.
But by the time you got
perennial candidates,
yeah,
right? Or even Lori Lightfoot. I mean, I knew she was embattled, and I didn't like her, but I think there were some people who might have supported her. Once he became once he made it to the runoff.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it was less about race. I mean, I've said this to people before. This was the first time in my adult life, first time in my voting life that I've had a situation where I've been in a city where there's a real choice between mayoral candidates, where you had on the one side a guy who was basically a Republican, school reformer, and then this, pro-union former educator guy, right? So it was such a staunch thing. And I think the way to understand it for me is that it really came out of this last decade or so, right? The fights against Rahm Emanuel, the mobilizations around Laquan McDonald. Even before that, the earlier CTU strike, which kind of galvanized a lot of people, under the leadership of Karen Lewis. We really wanted this battle back then, right? I mean, we wanted it to be Karen Lewis versus Rahm Emanuel. And then she got a cancer diagnosis, and that kind of derailed, that particular moment. But I think the way I've been talking to people about it is, Brandon is a great guy, but his election is really about this change on the ground in Chicago, where, to its credit, Black Lives Matter mobilizations, as well as, a lot of progressive union forces on the ground have made his election possible, right? A different kind of candidate, and not like in the case of Lori Lightfoot, where some people identified her as a progressive, right? I don't know how.
Well, because she's Black, female, lesbian. Like, if you're just some things, then they call you a progressive.
Right. But she was just as bad as Rahm Emanuel in terms of her relationship to the growth, machinery in Chicago.
Yeah.
And that's my fear with Brandon still, though, right? Is like, he still has to deal with this city council, right, which has had some change, some turnover, but still it has a bad history of a kind of a do nothing council, rubber stamp. And so
and he can't do anything about the systemic act. Mayor, point blank period, isn't going to change capitalism. You talk about this in the book about Jackson, Mississippi, and Chokwe Lumumba and that legacy, and you have full on socialist mayors. And what can he do? He's been fighting the state. He can't even get pipes running in the capital city of the state, because they're basically openly saying, why should the richer, wealthier suburban parts of the state be paying for the Black core? They would rather bomb out their Capitol building than feel like the white part of the state should have to pay for the poor Black urban literal capital of the entire state.
Right.
Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.